I have, first of all, a question about dialogue. So the students sent something saying, how do we identify whether it's a formal dialogue or an informal dialogue? So can we start with our gaps? If you remember, this is our mnemonic so that we can look at what is essential for any piece of writing. So this means genre. So what have I been asked to look at? Dialogue. But remember, the dialogue will also go with the interview. They are the same format and very similar in their approaches. But this is the key one. If you are asking me about what style to use, so the question was, do we look at formal or informal? And how do we identify formal or informal as a requirement from the question? Well, it looks at your audience and your purpose. So audience and purpose, these two go together. Who is participating in this dialogue? You will have two people. Usually it's just two. In the interview, usually also just two. Who are they? What is the relationship between these two people? What is the purpose of that dialogue or interview? Who's kind of directing it? Who's in control? Who's responding? What is the purpose of the person who is directing? And what is the purpose of the person who is responding? Then the S, as I said, stands for style. And that refers to the kind of English that you are using. So, should you be using colloquial language, for example? Is that required? Should we be using a more formal register? What about the vocabulary that you are using? Should there be jargon words in this vocabulary? Are you being interviewed, for example, about a particular job? Are you being asked very specific things that will involve jargon? Is it a dialogue, let's say, about music? In which case, are you going to be using music dialogue? These are the kinds of questions you're asking yourself. So, how do I tell whether it's formal or informal? I look at my gaps, always my gaps. So I thought what we'd do is just look at some topics. So I thought we'd start with FAL. So when you are planning for FAL, you are looking at 120 to 150 words. Here's a question off a past paper. So who's in this dialogue? There's you and your parent, okay? Who's driving this? Well, you have decided to talk to your parent about this friend. Your parent doesn't approve. Presumably what your parent has said is this person is a bad influence. So you are now planning, if we go back to 120 to 150 words. It's not long. If you're going to convince your parent, I'm also looking at the length of the paragraphs. You can't just have me saying something very briefly. Why don't you approve of my friend? Let's say that is a question. Then the parent, so decide if it's your mom or your dad, answering, the person's a bad influence. And then you go, no, he isn't. Yes, he is. No, he isn't. I said he was. That is not going to get you marks on a dialogue, because all it is this toing and froing, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. That's not going to do it for you. So you need to say to yourself, 150 words. A longish paragraph would be about 80 words. So maybe you're going to plan 80 words, and you're going to plan this to convince, because we're looking at this, to convince your parent. So you'd say something like, let me explain. And then you can explain for 80 words. Should this be formal or informal? Well, say to yourself, you're not going to swear at a parent. You're not going to swear in a national exam. So you're not going to go that informal that you're hitting swearing. Slang. I think if you use too much slang when you're trying to persuade your parent that this person isn't a bad influence, and it's all just riddled with slang, half of which your parent won't even understand, maybe 80% of this your parent won't understand, then I do not think you're going to convince your parent. So should you sort of lean towards the more formal style? Yes, I think you should, because you're trying to convince your parent, who's an adult, older than you. You want to show respect, and above all, you want to show respect because you want to convince your parent that this person, this friend of yours, is absolutely fantastic, and your parent goes, you know, you have my blessing, my son, on you go. So think about formal, informal. How informal? How formal? And can I just stop and talk about slang for a second? Why do we use slang? Does everybody use slang? Absolutely. Why? Because slang establishes your identity. It establishes who you are, and it establishes who you are in a group. So is my slang your slang? No ways. So colloquial language will be understood by a lot of people. So if I say your mom and your dad, or even kids, hi kids. So yes, we'd understand colloquial language. So where do you go from colloquial language into slang? Where's the very vague borderline? Because it is a vague borderline. It's where the language becomes much more the language of a group. And if you are not part of that group, you don't understand. Now, I often threaten that I'm going to write down all my slang expressions when I use them in class, and my class goes, what was that? Then I plan to write them all down, and then I plan to have a whole lesson where I just string one slang term together with another and have a lesson, because my slang is not your slang and you wouldn't understand. So when students say to me, but why can't we use slang in an exam? Because you want the marker to understand you, and your slang establishes your group identity, which means that you shut out the marker mostly. So that's why you should be very, very careful of slang. Certainly not in paper 1, not in paper 2, and in paper 3. You know, students say to me, well, can't I use a slang word and then I can put a little asterisk and I can put a little asterisk at the bottom of the page and explain it? Yes, you could, but that's so clumsy. I mean, that is a really, I can't think of a better word than clumsy. It's a clumsy tactic. So if you're going to use slang, you need then somehow to explain it as you go on so that the reader would understand the slang, but you mustn't do it in such an obvious way that the reader goes, don't treat me like an idiot. So it's really difficult. So slang, put it to one side. Swearing doesn't even enter the room. So do we all swear? Yes, of course we do. But you don't swear in an exam. You don't swear in a piece of writing. And again, students say to me, but what if I'm trying to create this character? I'm writing this essay or this dialogue, and I'm trying to create the character. Well, think about another way of doing it. This is an exam or an SBA task. Right, so let's look at another example. So this is a dialogue. Again, it's It's a foul question from a past paper. So it's your parent or your guardian. So once again, you've got you and parent. But it's about a job offer in another town. You're still trying to convince. Look at the topic, still convincing. But here I would say that the colloquial language is probably more appropriate. Why? Because in the previous one, you're trying to convince your parent to accept a friend the parent doesn't like. I don't want to say that that's more serious, because this is also serious. This is a job offer. It's a very serious situation. But in a way, the tension isn't there. The first dialogue, there is tension. The parent has said, I don't approve of this person. Bad influence. I don't want you seeing this person anymore. While you're living under my roof, you know how parents speak. So this one is more, I don't know, Dad, you've always wanted this. Why are you refusing it? And Dad says maybe, well, I have to uproot the whole family. Oh, come on, Dad. We can cope with that. We can cope with change. This is something do you understand? There's warmth in this one. At least I would think so. Surely, looking at that topic again, isn't there warmth there that wouldn't you be thinking about your parent rather than yourself in this situation? Well, at least I hope you would. So the colloquial language, because I'm saying there's warmth, there's concern, I would think, for your parent. You would be wanting to find out, well, why are you refusing it, Mom, Dad? And so, therefore, this language would be more appropriate. So, colloquial, and more colloquialisms than the other one. Okay, let's look at a third one. Right. Now, this one, well, first of all, you are siblings. So, if you want to use that slang, please make sure that everybody understands it. So you can go with the colloquial language, because I am worried about your slang. So colloquial rather than slangy. But you are siblings. She's got this career. You'd better decide on, is this going to be like the first one, quite tense? Or is this going to be warmly supportive? Or are you trying to be, I don't know, thoughtful, reflective, responsible? You see, the more serious you get, if you're saying to your sister, I don't think you should do this, then you might want less colloquialism, because now it's a much more serious kind of conversation with the possibility of tension if your sister feels that you are not supportive of her. Right, so looking at each one, what are we saying? The question was, how to identify whether it's an informal or a formal dialogue. You look at the situation, you look at the context. So you are going to look at the context of the dialogue. You're going to look at your gaps, and your gaps gets you audience, which gets to context. Who are the people involved? What is the situation? What is the relationship between these people? Why are they having a conversation at all? What is the purpose of that conversation? And again, the purpose goes to context. And we've seen that at least twice we've got convincing as a term, and we've certainly got some kind of discussion verging on an argument going on in all three. Then let's look at some home language topics. So here you've got a little bit more words to play with. You've got the 180 to 200 words. And let's look at this one. Okay, so you can see this is going to be formal, surely. You've been summoned by a senior person. Your reputation has been compromised. You've been involved in some kind of controversial issue. So what was it? I think what's really important, something I haven't talked about, is how you plan these dialogues. You need, like with the friend, you need to say, who is the friend? What has the friend been doing? Don't leave the friend vague. Here, you need to know, what is the controversial issue? Were you protesting on campus as a student? What went wrong? Did the protests become violent? Is that why your reputation has been compromised? What was it? If you are in a boarding school, I know a number of you are at boarding schools. You live on the premises. So what happened at the boarding school? Was it an issue of bullying? Were you part of something happening at night that you shouldn't have been part of? Be careful about how far you go. This is a national exam. But you've been summoned by a senior person. So this is going to be formal. Why? Because the situation is extremely tense. You have to explain yourself. I'm not saying you were in the wrong. You could explain yourself and be proven to be perfectly virtuous. Your reputation could be intact at the end of it, but you need to explain it. And once again, when we're talking about the number of words, I would certainly look at 80, maybe even 100 words. I would have this person, the senior person, saying, please explain why you were involved in, let's say, the issue of bullying, the bullying of a younger student in the boarding house last night. And then I would give myself 80 to 100 words to explain quietly and calmly what happened, what I did, why, in fact, I wasn't in the wrong or whatever it is. Let's look at another topic. Right. So this one, it really depends, if we're looking at formal versus informal, who the other person is. If this turns out to be, I don't know, the parent of a friend of yours, you've got to decide on the unexpected turn as well. What's going to be the unexpected turn? Maybe an old school friend. Whatever it is, it depends on who that person is, the age of that person, how well you know this person. Is this person a complete stranger, or do you realize that this is somebody that you used to know? In which case the conversation could go from quite formal to, I didn't even recognize you, but of course it's you. I don't know. You need to think about the age of the person, whether or not you know them, what the unexpected turn is. Is it something fantastic, something shocking? And depending on what that unexpected turn is, and the age, and whether you know this person, excuse me, then you would choose. Am I choosing a formal or an informal style? And we've got one more. Look at this one. Right, so it could be any of the characters. So you've got to decide who you're going to choose and then what their relationship is. So if you take, let's say, these people, they look much older. So if you choose them and they are interacting with each other, are they strangers to each other? Are they enthusiastic about what they are seeing that's being drawn? Because it certainly looks as if they've settled down. I mean, they've got these little stools. Look here. Some kind of little stools to sit on. Did they come to watch it? Are they enthusiastic? In which case it might be enthusiastic. They might be very colloquial. Are you going to do a conversation between these two over here? Are they friends? It depends on whom you're choosing. Are you going to choose one of the older people and the younger one? And I think if it's all very nice and friendly, then yes, I would think a colloquial, informal style would be appropriate. That's meant to be a you. Okay, so yes, I would say that this conversation between any of these two people could indeed be informal. And then what we've got here is an interview. So I just put the interview on at the end. What they provided was the advert here. And then they said, you've been shortlisted, you've applied for the position, but now you are going for the interview. So using the dialogue form, that's what I meant by saying that they're very similar. Write the interview. So now say to yourself, in an interview, this is a more formal situation. Yes, of course you can use some colloquial language, but you are being interviewed, and it is for this position. So you're going to be part of the cabin crew of an airliner. So I think you would go for the more formal style than for the colloquial. Yes, certainly, you know, I'm fine, thank you. That kind of I'm fine. But be careful about using too much of that. Students begin interviews with, hello, please sit down. Would you like tea? Would you like coffee? Please cut all of that. Put that into the little scenario and begin in the interview. But if the person says something like, tell me why you think you're appropriate for this position, you could say, I'm. I don't think the I'm is inappropriate. So the colloquial language there. But I would certainly remember this is an interview, you want a job, and I would be more formal. Okay, so I hope that answers that question about formal or informal in terms of a dialogue. You look at the dialogue you've been given. You say, what is the relationship between these people? What kind of language would they use to each other? What is appropriate for the situation, the context that I've been given in the question?